Today, our case presentation, our didactic, will first be presented by one of our panelists, Kathleen Karamy, and she is going to be presenting on mandated reporting for ABA professionals. Today is a unique opportunity because you're able to earn your ethics CEUs that are required by the BACB. And we then have our case presentation that's going to be a case study. It is a presentation by Arlette, and she's going to be presenting a case on an actual client. For those of you that have joined, you know that ECHO is HIPAA compliant, and so we maintain client privacy and confidentiality. So no identifying patient information will be presented during the case presentation. But she'll be reviewing a case through the progression with a client that that she was working with, and CPS report was filed, and how she was able to actually work with the family and continue care, creating additional parent goals and supporting them through that process, and allowing the child to still continue receiving care as well. So I think it's a really great opportunity for all of us to learn from. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next part of ECHO today, which is our didactic with Kathleen.
So again, my name is Kathleen Karamy. I have a master's in healthcare administration. I function as the co-founder and CEO of business operations for Behavior Change Institute. And today the didactic is on mandated reporting for ABA professionals. I'll start by saying this is a very big topic for a brief didactic, so we'll do our best to hit the basics and, of course, answer any questions that you have. So getting started, mandated reporting of child abuse or neglect is a state and federal law. So each state in the United States has a law related to mandated reporting. So who is considered a mandated reporter? Well, mandated reporters vary state by state. Some states have designated lists of professionals or individuals that would qualify as a mandated reporter, and other states indicate that everyone qualifies as a mandated reporter. In every state, board-certified behavior analysts, board-certified assistant behavior analysts, registered behavior technicians, and healthcare administrators do qualify as a mandated reporter. Typically, these are individuals who have frequent contact with children. So other mandated reporters include social workers, teachers, medical providers, child care workers, medical examiners, and law enforcement officers. Abuse and neglect can take many forms, so we'll start with physical abuse. So physical abuse would be any non-accidental physical injury inflicted to a child by a parent, caregiver, or someone who is responsible for the child. There are many signs of physical abuse, and so some common signs are unexplained burns, bites, bruises, broken bones, or black eyes. There could be fading bruises or marks that you see on the child. Maybe the child is overly frightened of a parent or caregiver. Maybe they self-report injury by a parent or caregiver if they have the verbal ability to do so. There are also signs that you could pick up on of a parent or caregiver, for example, if they're offering conflicting or unconvincing information related to a child's injury. If you observe harsh physical discipline inflicted by a parent, or they have a history of abusing a child. There can also be very disarming ways to ask a child or a parent about injuries. And it's also been interesting, I think, when we do ask to see what information is provided, even by those who might be present while the question is asked. So, for example, we had a case we were working on several years ago where the behavior technician asked the child about a bruise on his arm, and the mother responded that the father had been overly aggressive with the child. And so that was something that we had posed the question to the child, the mother shared information, and that was something that was absolutely reportable under the mandated reporting laws. Another form of abuse is sexual abuse or exploitation. And so this could include any activities by a parent or caregiver, such as fondling a child's genitals, penetration, incest, rape, sodomy, indecent exposure, or pornographic materials involving a child. Now, there are many signs that are common when a child is being sexually abused or exploited, and I just want to preface by saying we always see things through the scope of our relationship and what we know and understand about the child and family. And so something like bedwetting or sleep disturbances is something that's commonly pointed out when children are being sexually abused. But as we know, we may be working with a child who we're working on toilet training, for example, and they're experiencing bedwetting. We may be working with children who have complex medical conditions or on certain medications that interfere with sleep. And so because a child is wetting their bed or has sleep disturbances does not necessarily mean that the child is being sexually abused, but it's good to know some key characteristics and things to pick up on if there is sexual abuse going on. The other big thing we see is very sophisticated or unusual knowledge or sexual behavior in young children, pregnancy or sexually transmitted disease in someone who's very young, for example. And then emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is essentially psychological abuse. This can be more difficult, I think, to identify, but we as ABA providers have the benefit of spending frequent and intensive time with our children and families. And I think over the course of time and spending time in intimate environments such as the home, the barriers go down throughout time and we get to be part of the natural organic lives of our family. So some things we may observe that would indicate emotional abuse would be the parent or caregiver blaming, belittling, or berating the child, potentially refusing to respond to a child's needs, such as refusing touch. And again, this is less visible potentially than physical abuse, but there are some common signs that we can pick up on. Neglect is failure of a parent or caregiver to provide the child's basic needs to the degree that the child's health, safety, and well-being are threatened. And so basic needs could include food, shelter, clothing, and in some states, education. And again, I think this is something that we as mandated reporters, it's very important to keep in mind that it's not our job to determine whether neglect is willful or not willful, whether abuse or neglect is actually taking place or how harmful it is, but we're responsible for reporting any suspected abuse or neglect, regardless of why it's occurring. So as we know, many of the families that have trouble meeting their basic needs, much of it is related to socioeconomic status, the family requiring additional resources. Maybe one of the caregivers has a mental health disorder that's interfering with their ability to meet the child's basic needs. And so as long as we can detect that and report it to professionals who can come in, make a determination, and provide resources, that's the most important piece. That's our job as mandated reporters. Neglect can take many forms: physical neglect, abandonment, shuttling, nutritional neglect, clothing neglect, or other forms of physical neglect, including reckless disregard for the child's safety. Shuttling is something that I don't often think about when I think about neglect, and so it just goes to show that there are many forms of neglect and some may be less obvious. So shuttling is when a child is repeatedly left in the custody of others for days or weeks at a time, possibly due to the unwillingness of the parent or caregiver to maintain custody. Again, if the child's being shuttled around from family to friends for great lengths of time, the family probably really does need some additional resources, and oftentimes those types of resources are beyond our reach, and so we have to include outside professionals such as child welfare workers to help the family. Medical neglect is a big one. So this is when there is a medical recommendation given by a medical provider and the family does not follow through. Maybe their lack of follow through is severe enough to represent a danger to the child. And so examples of this could be if a child has an infection or an illness, the provider prescribes antibiotics and the family fails to fill the prescription and get the child on antibiotics, and the child not taking those antibiotics poses a severe medical risk. Another would be the child endures a large wound and maybe is in need of stitches and the family fails to take them for care. Again, this could occur for many reasons. Maybe the family is uninsured. Maybe they don't have transportation to take the child to the medical provider. But again, this would be reportable as medical neglect, and And our report is really helping the family make sure that they have access to meet the basic needs of their children. As we know, there are many social, cultural, and religious beliefs that could interfere with the family's follow-through. And again, we can understand the family and the child through that social, cultural, or religious lens, but it's not our job to make a determination whether someone has a specific belief and it does not or does qualify as neglect. It's our job to identify when the child is at risk and report that so that the professionals can make that determination. There's also a form of neglect called educational neglect, and this is when the child does not have access to attend school. Maybe they're frequently truant and the family is unable to support them consistently attending education. Of course, the kids that we work with, there are many things that come up related to education, barriers to access education or accommodations under their special education plan. And again, it's important that we work with everyone involved to identify what the child needs and how we can best meet those needs. There are many signs of neglect that are more visible. So, for example, the child may be wearing soiled clothing. They may be inadequately dressed for the weather. They may be hungry frequently, for example, tired with little energy. Maybe they're a very young child caring for other siblings, have poor hygiene, distended stomach to indicate malnutrition, or unattended medical or dental problems. Again, we know the children and families that we work with, and we come to understand things through the lens of that relationship. And so, for example, we worked with a child who would only go to school if he was wearing his pajamas, and it was the same footsie pajamas that he had to wear to school day after day after day after day. And this is something that unless he was wearing those pajamas, he would not go to school. And so the only way the family could get him to school would be to allow him to wear these pajamas. And this is something the family had contacted us for support in transitioning the child out of the pajamas. It's something that the family communicated to the school as well. And so had we not been communicating with the family and with the school, an educator seeing a child show up in the same set of pajamas for 3 weeks in a row could suspect some potential neglect. And so again, it's important for us to understand these things through the lens of the child and family, and then understand some of the characteristics that might be caused by other things. With all of this, the major takeaway here is mandated reporters are required to report the facts and circumstances that led them to suspected abuse or neglect, and they're not required to provide proof, so just relaying the facts. Common questions that come up about our obligations to report are around privileged communications and PHI under HIPAA. So privileged communication would be a protected interaction between two parties where confidential information cannot be shared. And of course, we see that under HIPAA as well. It's important to know that while we protect PHI when it comes to abuse or neglect of a child, the mandated reporting laws trump privileged communication and protections under HIPAA. And so if there is a child at risk by law, we have to report, we have to share that information. Common questions that come up also are around reporter identity. So typically in most states, there's a toll-free number that you can call in to report suspected abuse or neglect of a child. Those verbal reports are typically followed by a written report. So when you do call in, they'll give you instructions as to whether or not a written report is required and what the timeline for submission should look like. As much information as you have is extremely helpful. There are some basic points of information that they will always gather from you, such as the child's information. Depending on what state, they may gather your information, information about the incident, about the family, for example. But if you have other information, including family dynamics, how to build rapport, history, cultural information, anything that you can give to these child welfare workers is going to be so appreciated. They often get just very basic information, and they're responsible for for opening an investigation and making a determination. So anything that we can give to help them is going to benefit the case. So there are 19 states in the U.S. that actually require mandated reporters to give their contact information. In most states, so 41 states, there are protections. So the child welfare organization cannot disclose the reporter's contact information to the alleged perpetrator. So what happens after a report is filed? So the report goes to a child welfare worker who is a state employee typically, and they are responsible for determining whether abuse or neglect has likely occurred, whether the child's at immediate risk or danger, what the motivation or capacity was of the alleged perpetrator, and the availability of a non-offending caregiver, for example. So they're going to review the report, potentially open up an investigation if they believe abuse or neglect took place, and then they will typically recommend additional resources. So not only for the child, but mostly for the family as well. So they could come in and recommend anger management courses, mandated counseling, for example. They could provide the service, respite services for the family. So they're a connector of resources. The child welfare workers really do want the family to be successful and to be able to care for their child as independently and successfully as possible. And so they're going to do everything possible to connect the family with those necessary resources. It's important as a mandated reporter, if you're working for an employer group, to understand internal policies and procedures as well. So for example, here at Behavior Change Institute, we disclose the fact that we're mandated reporters and explain what that means to our families at the onset of service. We often do refreshers as well if we have to make a report. We have our staff go through an initial mandated reporter training, and they get a certificate at the end. We run refreshers, and then we also have an internal acknowledgement so that our employees know, based on the state they're working in, how the state defines abuse or neglect of a child, what their responsibility is as a mandated reporter, and how they can go about making a report. We also have an internal policy where if there is suspected abuse or neglect of a child, that it's also reported administratively. So it's reported to our administrators, not so that we can determine whether or not it's reportable. If there is suspected abuse or neglect, that provider by law has to report regardless of what the organization thinks. But we'd like to be involved so that we can help support our staff. So for example, we can help them determine what available resources that we can offer as providers and as an organization to help this child and family be successful. We also want to help our professionals make sure that they're compliant with the mandated reporting laws, so making sure that we file a report in a timely manner, that we document the report fully, and that we also file any written reports that is required. We also provide support on strategizing considerations, including, do we tell the family that we made the report? And if so, who's going to inform the family, and how are we going to go about doing this? It's important as a mandated reporter to know what your state and local resources are. So for example, in New Mexico, we report to CYFD, which is Children, Youth, and Families Department through the state of New Mexico. A really great resource is childwelfare.gov. They have many, many, many tools on mandated reporting. There are many free mandated reporter trainings out there as well. And what's really great about childwelfare.gov is they really get into the specifics in each individual state, how the state defines it, what the parameters of the law are, what the penalties are for non-reporting, and where to make a report. So if you're not sure, childwelfare.gov is a great resource. There are certainly penalties because mandated reporters is enforced under law. So, for example, in most states, failure to report or false reporting can lead to a misdemeanor, time in jail, as well as a significant fine. In the state of New Mexico, upon conviction, a person who fails to report or provides a false report can serve up to 1 year in jail and also face a fine up to $1,000. It's important to know, in addition to the law, if you're practicing as a behavior analyst, you also risk sanctions, including loss of certification and licensure by the board. So it's very, very serious. Considerations for ABA practitioners is who is going to make the report. So if you're supervising a registered behavior technician and the technician is the individual who directly observes potential abuse or neglect, that registered behavior technician is going to have to make the report directly. They always want to hear from the source so that they can get factual information. So we can support that registered behavior technician in making the report, discussing how a report is made, what happens after a report is made, providing them the resources they need to make the report, and then how to document it after. In terms of informing the family, it does not have to be the individual who made the report who informs the family if that's what you decide. Certainly can be done by the supervising clinician. It can be done by a company administrator, whoever is best, determined by the team to discuss that with the family. So oftentimes here at Behavior Change Institute, we opt to inform the families that we're making the report. Oftentimes, if we're making the report, it's probably going to be quite obvious that we are the individuals who made the report. And so later Arlette will present a case where we did inform the family beforehand. It was a great success, and I think that so much of whether or not it's successful or not depends on the relationship we have with the family at the time we make the report, and then also how we present the fact that we are mandated reporters, what it means to make a report, and how we're going to support the family in ensuring they have access to adequate resources. Just briefly at the end, I went through the ethical guidelines established by the BACB, and there were so many components of these guidelines that apply to mandated reporting. So for example, under integrity, they talk about behavior analysts being honest and truthful. This applies to making fraudulent or untruthful reports. For example, we want to make sure that we're only providing the facts when we provide a mandated reporting report. Also that we do so, we behave in accordance with law, and so behavior analysts are responsible for conforming to the legal and ethical code of any social or professional community they practice in. So even if something conflicts with the ethical code, for example, there is information on confidentiality, but we're able to break that confidentiality and make a report if the law requires it, for example. Responsibility for advocating for what's in the client and family's best interest, collaborating with third parties. So for example, if there's a child welfare worker involved, it's probably going to benefit the child and family if we as a provider do collaborate and share information with that individual. Documenting, for example, so documenting suspected abuse or neglect, documenting our report, and then documenting follow-up, providing appropriate disclosures, and then reporting any ethical violations that would pose a risk of harm for a client or family. So for example, we have 30 days to report if there is an ethical or legal violation by a behavior analyst so that the board can investigate that. And that wraps up the presentation on mandated reporting. All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathleen. That was wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you so much, Kathleen, for your introduction and your presentation. That was really helpful. And as we're going through this presentation, please feel free to think about any questions that you may have, and I will be happy to address them in collaboration with Kathleen. So my name is Arlette Bujanda, and I'm an associate clinician and research assistant for Behavior Change Institute, and I'm located in El Paso, Texas. And the case that we're going to be covering today is a case that we have been working with him for over close to 4 years. And because, as Kathleen mentioned in her presentation, as behavior analysts also in outlining our ethical code, we have the primary obligation to protect confidentiality of those whom we work. So we are basically also complying with the HIPAA federal law. So we want to be like those little monkeys and protecting the case of this client. We're going to change his name to Leo. So we're going to present the case of Leo, and through this presentation, we're going to cover some of his treatment goals. And then we're going to cover the clinical recommendations that we made in order to achieve those goals. Some of the case concerns that arise throughout the beginning of the treatment, which were not only concerns from the clinical team, but also concerns from the parents. And how we managed to make some treatment modifications to address all of those concerns. And we are going to cover a specific incident that happened to be observed by the RBT on the case. And we're going to cover some other incidents that were related to our incident that we observed. And we're going to cover the ethical responsibility that we hold as behavior analysts and healthcare providers. And we're going to talk about other factors that we had to consider in around this incident and how they were affecting our decisions for the reporting process. So we will cover everything on how we analyze this and how we basically made the report. And we're going to cover how that led to implementing different parent goals and also providing support to the parents, which led to just positive outcomes. So at the beginning of services, Leo was referred to BCI to address challenging behaviors and basically emotional regulation skills. And his parents reported that Leo did really well at home. It was basically happening at school, and he just didn't want to do math. That was one of the main reasons he displayed problem behaviors at school. So we decided to observe Leo and decided to also start with some rapport building at the beginning of treatment. So we were feeling pretty content. So according to our ethical responsibilities, when providing services to a minor or an individual who is a member of a protected population, we had to inform the parents or the client surrogates about the treatment. So we share all of our goals, all of our plan of action basically for his behavior plan. And because it is also in our ethical codes to describe how the environmental conditions need to be in order to for the program to be effective. We decided to share these strategies with the parents as well to identify a safe place for him to go and calm down. We decided to also identify a therapeutic location for him where he was going to receive his treatment. And we went ahead and got started with our rapport building phase. So during this phase, the parents, as they had indicated in their assessment, we are having a good time throughout the day and home. We don't see that many problem behaviors. So you can, go ahead and start with rapport building, which we explained we were not going to place any demands at this point. We were only going to follow his lead and engage in whatever he wanted to engage. And the parents decided to follow with their usual routine. If he had to have dinner, if he had to brush his teeth, whatever he had to do throughout the session, they requested that they could do that throughout the rapport building phase. So we agreed because of the parent report that we have received during the assessment. So this is the data that I'm going to make it bigger so you guys can see. This is the data that we gather on our baseline during the rapport building. So when you look at this rate of emotional outburst, some of the challenging behaviors that he displayed were physical aggression and property destruction and elopement from actually leaving the house. So those were our main goals. And actually, let me see, I believe we may have it up here. Okay, we'll be covering here shortly. So an emotional outburst was basically just a combination of at least two of those behaviors that they often happen together, which were also paired with crying or screaming or some verbal protest. And as you can tell from this rate, if he was having an average about 2 to 3 episodes per hour, it is not as significant as when you look at the data from duration. So let me share this with you. So when you look at the duration per episode, he was having an average of 38 minutes of duration per episode. So basically the entire hour was in challenging behavior. So this is when we realized this was a pretty significant problem behavior whenever parents presented any type of instruction throughout the home. And although we were not placing the instructions, he was still displaying this amount of problem behavior. So Here's where we list the goals in challenging behaviors. Okay. So the primary focus we decided to have the most severe, which were the physical aggression, the property destruction, and elopement from the home, or any attempt to do so. And we were targeting as secondary goals, reducing screaming, crying, and verbal protest. And based on direct observations and parents' interview and also the completion of the FAST, we hypothesized that the functions of these behaviors were escape from aversive tasks, but also access to attention from parents, which was provided to him in the form of negative attention, such as reprimands or threats to remove toys or preferred items. And based on these phase, we decided to continue with our treatment goals, which we're also including in a heavily focus on manding, which was alternative functionally equivalent replacement behaviors. So we were just teaching him how to man for break from aversive tasks, to man for others' attentions, but also to man for more time with current reinforcement, an alternative task, or for help if it was a difficult task. Other skills that we worked on at the beginning as well with him were emotional regulation skills. So we were teaching him how to learn how to use common strategies in the moment, and then how to problem solve, such as demanding for help or such as demanding for alternative tasks. As well as we taught him how to do different other skills that were like tolerating the aversive task and how to wait for those preferred items, activities, but also for parents' attention. So according to our ethical code, we had to make our clinical recommendations based on scientifically supported techniques and strategies. And basically, we share all of these with the parents on how we were going to proceed and the reason why we were going to do it this way based on the research that we have found. So we decided to go in with a demand fading program, which the phase one was just transitions from highly preferred to highly preferred activities, which were usually different video games for him. And then later phases included transitions from preferred to non-preferred, and then we will gradually increasing how many non-preferred tasks he was going to complete throughout the whole treatment. So we also began with a thick reinforcement schedule, which basically every single time that he demanded for a break, he will get access to a break, or every time he will display any appropriate behaviors, he will get the reinforcement that he was working for. And we also included a level system with, which is basically was a color system for him, which was like a stoplight, a red light, yellow light, and green light. So if he had all appropriate behaviors, completely free of problem behavior, he will be on green. As soon as he started failing to comply and went to longer than 30 seconds, and he'll move to yellow. And then if he had any physical aggression or property destruction or attempting to leave the home, he will immediately go to red. But we decided to begin where he will have the opportunity to go back to green, basically, if he used a common strategy or problem-solving strategy, and he will still be able to earn his reinforcement. We decided to use extinction for escape and attention at the beginning, and we also decided to use a redirection strategy to his safety place, which was to his room, to engage in calming down. And that was only for whenever he went to level red, which was the most severe problem behavior. So when we began to introducing these treatment, let me show you the graph again. So as you can tell here from the graph, we only had 2 intervention sessions before these phase change that you see here in gray, where he was admitted to a hospital that they were going to do crisis management for him. And we'll cover a little bit later why he went to that hospital. So at this point, when we began with our clinical recommendations, the parents reported specific concerns during our first intervention day. And basically they say that, they have observed variability in his problem behavior, not only in frequency, but also in duration, and that they have observed it at home, but also at school and outside in community outings. and that this had been happening since we began rapport building. Or a little bit around that same date. So based on these concerns, they requested the following. They requested that we removed any type of physical prompts. So we were using physical prompts to, we had visual prompts for manding for brakes. So we will prompt him physically to touch the car so he could have a brake. And the parents requested that we remove that strategy. They also requested that we removed physical prompts for compliance or redirection to his room. And they also requested that we remove the extension strategy because they wanted us to provide an explanation to the client about why he wasn't supposed to behave that way. Another strategy that they requested that we started implementing was a reprimand for any type of aggression or property destruction. And they also requested that we provided options during problem behavior. So at that point, basically they were saying, if he has problem behavior, could you offer him what does he want at that point so we can know and then we can provide it to him. They also requested that we remove the strategy of redirection to his safety place as it was a physical guidance. And they requested that we remove the strategy for blocking elopement, which we were doing with our entire body and just basically blocking the area and redirecting. So when you get these concerns, of course, as our ethical code states, we have to advocate for what's best for the client as well. And we'll chat a little bit more about this as well here shortly. So this came to us to bring different clinical concerns on our side from our team. So we began with, of course, addressing the severity of the challenging behavior. So the intensity and the duration was our main concern and our primary focus to decrease during the treatment. And the safety of the client and the safety of the staff were also our priority. And also the other family members. He has siblings, so it was important for us to maintain everybody safe. And we identified different barriers after this meeting with the parents, which were that the parents were providing attention, such as reprimands or threats to remove future reinforcers, or even options of different activities during problem behavior. And when it escalated to aggression, the parents will provide, we're providing spanking. So one of our concerns also that after this meeting from the first intervention day with the parents, we realized that this was going to be a treatment barrier because they were requesting that we removed a great majority of our strategies from his behavior plan. So we came across the question, how do we modify the behavior intervention plan that it's in a successful way and that everybody feels comfortable implementing it, but also that it's ethical, in an ethical way. So our ethical compliance code states that we have the responsibility to all of the parties affected by the behavior analysis services, which at this point not only included Leo, but it also included his family members. So our ethical code also states that we have to identify and communicate who the primary ultimate beneficiary of services is, and then advocate for his best interest. So at this point, of course, we identified that Leo was the primary beneficiary of services. And most importantly, our ethical code also states that we put the primary beneficiary of services care above all of others. And that should the third party make arrangements for services that are contradicted by the behavior analyst recommendations, then we are obligated to resolve such conflicts in the best interest of the client. And if said that conflict cannot be resolved, then it is our responsibility to provide a transition plan to discontinue services for the client. So all of this was, of course, analyzed and addressed when we were trying to decide how to move forward for the second session of the intervention. So we had other ethical considerations as well, also outlined in our ethical codes, that we had to design a program that is conceptually consistent with behavior analytic principles. And we also had to involve the client in planning the consent of such behavior programs. So we were trying to address the parents' concerns while remaining with behavior analytic principles and how to change his environment, because the way they were requesting us for us to change his behavior plan was very similar to what's already happening during baseline. So we realized, of course, this is not going to change his behavior if we don't change his environment or his consequences or antecedents around that behavior. And then we had to talk about other considerations that were important in the decision on how to move forward. And we just addressed as a team meeting, do we continue advocating for the original behavior plan? What are the consequences if we do that? If we just, say this is the behavior plan that we're going to implement and there's no flexibility, what are we going to have as a result? So for example, can parents end services? Are there any other services available in the area that he can access at this point, because we live in a area that is limited with behavior analysis services? Is this going to be their first impression of ABA, which is probably going to lead to not pursuing ABA in the future for somebody else? We also had to consider the history of some recent incidents that we will cover here shortly. And we were also addressing what are the other strategies from best practice in behavior analytic approach that we can implement in his behavior intervention plan? And how can we compromise in the middle point to make it successful for everybody? So we decided to agree and compromise and say we don't need to physically prompt. We can model prompt. We can use different types of prompts, time delay, other strategies to show him how to mend or to promote compliance. So we decided to compromise and accept and implement that request. We also decided that it was appropriate to remove the extinction strategy for this case. And we decided to use other differential reinforcement strategies. And then we also talked to them about, okay, we're not going to do extinction, but because they were requesting that we provided attention to the client and basically allow him to leave the task, we decided, okay, well, what's best if we're not going to use extinction? We'd rather have a specific phrase that we want to provide to parents so they can use this phrase when he has problem behavior, and we are controlling what is the attention that we're giving him. And we are also going to control how much time he can leave the task and what he has to do right after he leaves the task. So our recommendations for the parents were, since we were not going to use physical prompts or physical guidance to his room, we asked the parents' involvement in guiding him to his room. So whenever he had problem behavior that escalated to aggression or basically to the most severe problem behaviors, we will ask the parents to come and they will guide Leo to his room. So then the attention that they were going to give was you have to go to your room and calm down. And then we showed them some calming down strips, basically, that they could show Leo, and they could model for him on how to engage in those calming strategies. And then they could also help him through a problem-solving board. So that will be the attention that they will be given at this point. And then they also requested that we remove this strategy from of blocking elopement. So we decided to agree with this strategy, which may sound a little interesting, but we decided to put some environmental modifications to prevent actual elopement from the home. So they put some different types of locks. They also put we also put some signs that we train him in throughout the house where he could stop at the exit of the house. And we also mentioned a little bit, I also mentioned a little bit about some incidents that were related to our special incident that we're going to talk about. And during that same meeting, after the first day of intervention, when the parents were reporting that they were concerned about the variability in his problem behaviors, they also reported 2 other incidents that had just happened in the previous 2 weeks, which was our report building phase. This was the first time that we had heard about them, and they basically shared them with us, starting with an incident that happened at school, which he was given a task to do math, and he struggled a lot with doing math. So this was very aversive to him. And he displayed aggression and also in the form of throwing desks or chairs to the peers. So it was a very dangerous and safety concern for the school. So at this point, they had to physically restrain Leo, and they had to move him out of the classroom so all the kids were safe. So they decided to bring him to the principal's office, where then they decided, well, if we let him watch a video, he will calm down. So he loved videos. He loved playing video games. So this was, of course, allowing him to calm down and to be pretty happy again. So all this incident at school led to some bruises. And these bruises were around his torso. So whenever we were in session, we never really saw these bruises because he always was wearing a shirt. So the parents, mentioned after this incident that they were kind of concerned on what to do about the school because they had just had a previous incident before this aggression happened where the previous week, the school had actually made a call to CPS. And this call was because they observed some bruises in Leo, that he was also having those bruises around his back. And when that whole investigation happened, they realized that the parents were spanking Leo. And when they were spanking Leo, he was backing up and he bumped into a furniture, and that's how the bruising on his back happened. So then the investigation was closed because they realized it was an accidental, basically an accident that happened. And they also stated that the Texas Family Code outlines that parents, grandparents, step-parents, or legal guardians have the duty and the right to use corporal and reasonable punishment to the child. So spanking was considered reasonable physical corporal punishment for Leo in this previous incident. So after we decided to modify the treatment and we went in for the second day of intervention, which was a Friday, everything went really well. The parents appeared to be very happy with the treatment now. They were still not participating, so we were struggling with getting them to guide Leo to his room, or they will still provide attention to Leo in the negative form, such as reprimands. So on the third day, which was a Saturday, the RBT went to have a session with Leo, and Saturdays, we decided to give him a free day. So he will work throughout the whole week, and then Saturdays he will just have a free day where he will just play with the BT if he had, if he met specific criteria for the week. So on Saturday, when our RBT arrived to the house, she came across Leo's aunt, who opened the door, and she was 16 years old, and she indicated to the RBT that the client was in his room, and she also mentioned that the client's parents were in their own room. So when the BT goes to to Leo's room, she realizes that he is just laying under a blanket and he doesn't want to come out and play. And usually when it was his free day, he will be very excited because he will just get to play. So after this, when the BT tried to play with Leo, he had to change from his PJs to his usual clothes. And she realized that he had some bruises on his arms, on his neck, and then he also had some small bruises on his ear and face. So the BT immediately texted me, and she mentioned these bruises. And she said, I feel like I need to give you a call because I want to give you all this information that's happening and I'm observing, but I don't feel it's appropriate to send it via text. So I said, absolutely. Why don't you tell the parents that you have to get something from your car and that you'll be right back. So she went outside so she will feel more just safer to share this information with me. And she mentioned all of these bruises, and she also mentioned that everybody seemed pretty mellow that morning, and that she didn't know how to approach it because the parents were in the room, and the aunt had gone into her room as well. So she was just left with the client in the living room, and she didn't know how to proceed. So at this point, we decided that she will go back in session and she will just gather more information from the client, and also if family members were, if it was possible to get information from them. And then we decided that after we gathered that information, we were going to analyze and proceed to reporting. So she went back into the house and she explained to the parents that she was going to be texting me throughout the session because she needed to check in about a material. And that way, because the BTs are not allowed to use their cell phones during session. So at this point, she went inside and the parents had come out and they were making breakfast. And at this point, our RBT asked Leo if he was up for playing or if he wanted to just have a more relaxing day since he seemed pretty tired. And he just said relaxing. He didn't want to play, which was very unusual as well for him. And she asked him if he had been playing a lot the day before and if maybe that's how he got his bruises or how did they happen. So Leo at this point just looked away from her and didn't talk to her anymore, and she kept on asking things about the video game and he just wasn't responding to any of her questions. So at this point we knew that definitely something was different with him and it wasn't just probably something that happened during playtime. So at this point, the RBT asked Leo again, how did the bruises occur? And he didn't answer the question again. And he just looked at mom, and mom answered for him. And although he is pretty vocal, he just wasn't answering. So the mom answered for him, and she just explained to him that, to the RBT, that Leo had having difficulties listening on Friday, and that he had a tough evening on Friday, and that she also understood that dad needed to control his temper. So as soon as she mentioned that phrase, we knew that we needed to make a call and that we were going to definitely report this case. So when we look at our ethical code, we find that it's our responsibility that if environmental conditions prevent implementation of a behavior change program, then we recommend that other professionals assistance be sought. So another ethical responsibility we had was if environmental conditions hinder implementation of the behavior change program, then we have to seek to eliminate those environmental constraints and identify in writing the obstacles to do so. So we decided to seek the assistance of Child Protective Services, not only to protect our child, but also to potentially protect the mom as well at this point, just based on the comments that the mom was making. So we also, when we look at our ethical responsibility, like Kathleen was mentioning, we are in obligation to be familiar with this code, but also to be familiar and comply with other ethical conducts that are related to our field of work, which is mandating reporting. And exactly how Kathleen described physical abuse, it qualified for what we were observing in Leo, which was the screen bruising that basically was not having a justifiable explanation. So then we decided, okay, so what's next? What do we do? So I indicated to the technician that she can finish her session, which was a shorter session than usual, just to prevent panic in the family after we heard that comment. So as soon as the technician finished her session, we went into a clinical meeting on the same day right after, and I specified to the behavior technician that we were going to be supporting her through this phone call. Just as Kathleen mentioned, in BCI, we promote a culture that we're always supporting each other, and especially in these tough situations. So I reached out to both of my supervisors, and they were both with me on phone calls, calling the parents as well later on. They both reached out to the behavior technician to make sure that she was feeling comfortable with the plan of action. And when we were together, we provided some tips to the behavior technician on how to make a report, because this will be her first report that she was making. So we basically explained that she had to explain just the facts, that she had to report what she observed, what she heard, exactly how it was. And we were together, and we also explained to the RBT that she was the one that had to make the call according to what the Texas law states, which is similar in other states as well. So when we were making this phone call, the CPS agent indicated us that she was going to be giving a call to the family within the next 12 hours due to the severity of the report, which was physical abuse. So they also indicated that because there was the other two incidents previously on the records from the school and from the parents, that they will just conglomerate everything in a single report as opposed to 3 different reports. And this was going to be more a continuation of a previous report that was already open. So after we made this report, we continued meeting as a team, and we decided that we were going to inform the family, because we knew that at this point it was very clear for the family who will be making this report, and we knew it was going to be an uncomfortable situation that could be taken in a personal way against the behavior technician. So we decided to call the family, and again, we did it as a team, and we just explained to the family why we were making this report. We wanted to make sure that the family felt supported, and while at the same time making sure that our client, Leo, was safe. So we try to explain that this was just a step in aiming to help the entire family to have a better quality of life, just accessing different resources in the community. We explained that CPS was not just a threat to take their children away, but also a resource in the community. They could access so many different ways of support through this department. So then we also explained that we are mandated reporters, and that we decided to make this report to protect the entire family and also to support the entire family. And we understood that it was a very stressful situation because he has severe problem behaviors. And we understand that that was not something that was easy to manage. So for this reason, this will be a good resource for the family to access different support and create a support system as well. And the last thing that we covered with the parents, we because they were providing these different concerns that I'll cover here shortly, but they were very concerned about how we were perceiving them as parents and how they were going to be perceived as parents by other people. They also explained that one of the teachers had previously explained to the mom that she shouldn't work because she should be home taking care of her son. So they were already feeling that sense of guilt due to his severe challenging behaviors. So we explained that these challenging behaviors were a barrier in how that family as a whole was interacting. So we wanted to make sure that we address the incident for the whole family. So some of the concerns that the parents mentioned to us immediately were, they're going to take away my children. I'm not going to see my children again. They're probably going to take away also my sister, who is underage, and she's under my care right now. My husband is in the military. He's going to lose his job. This is going to get us in serious trouble. Like, we don't, can we avoid this? What are we going to do? So at this point, we explained to the family that CPS collaborates with different departments, that they have different types of resources that they're going to give them, and it's not just going to mean they're going to take their children again away. So we, again, just reassure the parents of this. And we also mentioned to them we will provide all the information needed to make the report as smooth as possible, and we will be there with you through the entire process to connect you with other resources, but to make sure that our goal is being achieved with this collaboration with CPS. So after this collaboration, we were there on Sunday collaborating with the CPS. We were there on Monday, and I also recommended that the BT didn't have session on Monday because it was very recent and it was still very stressful. So we asked the BT to cancel her session on Monday and that I will personally go in instead and just provide that support to the family. My supervisors were also providing that support via telephone and via telehealth as well. So the parents felt that it was an entire team supporting them as well. So some of the positive outcomes after this collaboration, we talked to the CPS and they connected the family to another department that it's called Family-Based Safety Services, or FBSS. And this is a department that avoids that the kids are removed from their home. So their main goal is that the kids remain in their home, but they provide different support systems to the family. So they work through different types of counseling, crisis intervention. They offer parenting classes. They also provide substance abuse treatment if they need it. And they also provide domestic violence intervention and daycare, which was very helpful for these families. So after this recommendation that they connected them with that department, both of these departments require Leo's family to do the following. So they requested that Leo was admitted to the hospital that I cover in our graphs, where they were just going to do crisis management for Leo, and they were also going to stabilize his medication because we had it in our ABC data, and we just had some notes throughout the sessions that Leo was having multiple medication changes throughout a period of a month. So he went over 10 medication changes in a period of just 1 month, which was pretty significant. And a lot of these changes were happening per parent request or per parent decision without following a physician's recommendation, which we also learned through our presentation from Kathleen, that could be medical neglect. So they also addressed this through CPS as a medical neglect, and they required that Leo was in that hospital until his medications were completely stabilized and that parents were in agreement of following the recommendations when he will come out of the hospital. They also requested that dad completed anger management classes, and they also requested that both of these parents completed parent training. And they had different options. So one of the options is they could go to a specific set scheduled parent training classes on base, which because they're a military family, they have this department for them. Or they offer them that we could do the parent training goals through our ABA because we mentioned these to the CPS, that we have in our goals that the ultimate goal is that parents implement these strategies so he can generalize those skills with outside of session. So this was a very, very positive outcome because then we offer the parents, we can offer them at the comfort of your home. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to take days off from work because we can accommodate the schedule to your time when you're available. We can also provide the data that the CPS required, so we could provide that report after they had completed it. And they were also requested that they attended marriage counseling and that MOPSIC counseling services. So this is our data from when we began parent training. And as you can tell, our baseline was the 2 days of intervention. And that is what we took as our baseline. So the first goal that we implemented for parents was that they were going to deliver the reinforcement according to the schedule that we had set in place for his level system, but only when he was, he had met that criteria. And whenever he hadn't met that criteria, that they were going to withhold the reinforcers, but also that they were not going to use threats about taking those reinforcers away throughout the session. So as you can tell, this data is from 2014, so it took a whole year probably to get them full on board and fully implementing it consistently, but they have maintained this implementation up to date. So this was pretty good to see. And this is some more data as well of implementing antecedent-based strategies from his behavior plan. And then as soon as we have that CPS collaboration, then we start to see some variability, but definitely some higher points, which was really good to see. And then as soon as the case was closed, we see a slight decrease, but the motivation still was enough for the parents because they were seeing results with our sessions and the BT. They were able to master this implementation and maintain it up to date as well. And the same goes for consequence-based strategies. In this first graph, you can see that data was deployed right at the beginning, after a few months. But mom continued implementing it, and now we're just working on generalization of this data with dad as well. And just some last notes from this case and overall as well. These are some of the violations that Kathleen was mentioning as well, that as a behavior analyst can result in. So you may get an advisory warning if you're in a violation or if you fail to report a violation as well. And you can also have a suspension or restriction from your credential eligibility or your actual credentialing, which may include just your certification or if you're licensed in a specific state as well. And they will also do a combination of sanctions, which will also be reported to not only the credential holder and candidate, but also to some other compliance codes that they're violating. So for example, if we're violating the mandated reported code, then they will also report it to that state where you provide services, and then you can get different types of sanctions at that point. But that is all that I have for you guys today. I hope I didn't rush too much through it, but please let me know if you guys have any questions or any comments.
Thank you, Arlette. That was absolutely wonderful, and I think you did a fantastic job going through the entire case progression. And it's really a wonderful example of what the underlying goal and theme of this particular Echo Clinic and applied behavior analysis is, which is to identify treatment barriers that our families face and how those treatment barriers can affect the child outcomes. And this really highlighted many different treatment barriers to a great extent. And a lot of our families that we work with experience these treatment barriers, and we may not see it escalate into a situation of this magnitude, but quite often, I'm sure many of us have worked with families where it has escalated to points where it's been really severe for the family as well. And I'm really impressed with the way that you were able to manage the case and be able to work with the family to turn it into so many positives and identify this is how we're here to help support you, and this is how we can really work with you to achieve a greater quality of life for your family. And that's not easy to do, especially because you are in the home, we're in the home providing services, many of us are, and when we're working with families in the home, being able to continue care is our primary goal and responsibility to that child, and so being able to maintain that balance is really difficult. So I'd like to open it up to questions first from our audience, and then we'll move into questions from our panelists. But what questions do you have for Arlette regarding the case? It can be anything from questions about steps that she took or why she decided to take a certain step, or just related to mandated reporting in general. And you can also feel free to unmute yourselves and just speak up.
I'll have a question, Arlette. Well, first of all, this was a fantastic presentation, and I love how you handled everything. As some of the comments have said, I also love how you provided so much support to the BT while doing so. And so my question is, because you guys were so open about you being the one that were doing the report to CPS, how do you feel your rapport with the family change, or if it changed at all, and how did you, aside from that team meeting that you did where you showed them that this was for their own benefit, how else did you, or what actions did you take to maintain that good rapport with the family?
Yeah, definitely. That is a very good question. I think, overall it was very challenging. This was a family who basically they were very open as well and direct about bringing up any concerns to us, and they were also very straightforward in the sense of what if they didn't agree with something, they will immediately bring it up to the entire team. So it was definitely challenging. You know, I would say if I had any families that I was going to do a report and then let them know that I was reporting, this was definitely one of the toughest families to do so for, but we decided to go for it, and just I think, you know, one of the recommendations of my supervisors was, if we let them know, we can manage the messaging that we're going to send across, right? As opposed to if they just have somebody show up at the door and they immediately know it's us that reported, how is that going to be perceived as well? So I think, you know, the fact that we were able to intermediate, just basically go and provide our report to CPS, and how we were just accommodating to the parent training. We also provided a lot of the research articles that we based our strategies on, and we provided just different examples on how, of options. So we were also giving them options when we were making those modifications. You know, would you feel comfortable if we decided to avoid physical prompts? Would you feel comfortable intervening at this point, and the behavior technician will have to ask for your help to redirect him to his room? Would that make you feel better? And they were like, yeah, that will make me feel better, actually, because it's my own child. I know if, you know, I'm not going to hurt him. So we decided to give them options, and you know, we also decided to take full responsibility, you know, as supervisors, me and my supervisors, and basically say, you know, yes, she was the one that made the phone call, the RBT, but because at some point the parents were like, you know what, we don't want her back. We don't want her to be continuing our team. We understand she had to made it, but we don't want her back. We want another one. So at that point, we decided to explain, yes, we can bring another behavior technician so everybody's comfortable, and we can continue services. However, we explained we are taking responsibility of this. We are the ones ultimately guiding her to make this phone call as well, but also not only us, the state law is guiding her to make this report as well, right? So she is a mandated reported, and she had to make the call. This is nothing personal. She's here to only care, and this only shows you as well how much she cares for your child, right? She enjoys playing with Leo, and she'll be here back on Tuesday if you feel comfortable, and I'll be here to provide also that support. So it requires an increase in overlaps as well, and more team meetings throughout those first weeks right after the report was made. And that was okay, because we also want to make sure that the BT felt comfortable going back to their home, which was a tough situation for sure. So that is a little bit of how we proceeded. And then one of the steps that we took as well that I didn't mention in our presentation was, because they were so concerned about how I was physically restrained in school, we decided to attend IEP meetings, and we decided to have the RBT that made the report call go and do observations at the school, and we will basically bring in the entire report notes to the mom. So the mom felt more supported, and she understood at that point also at the dad as well, that the RBT didn't mean to break up a family by taking the child away, but also she meant to actually put everything, all the pieces together, and for all of us to be on the same page with the school system as well. So those were other support strategies that I guess we took for this family.
Yeah, no, that's great, Arlette. I am very impressed that you guys were able to maintain that relationship with the family and with the BT as well. That's very impressive.
Thank you.
Arlette, I have one quick question about your interaction with the representatives at Child Protective Services. You know, I know that funding varies from state to state, and sometimes these are, like many of our mental health services, underfunded and short-staffed. Did you find that this experience was pretty fluid, and that they were relatively supportive? Did you guys have the same representatives working with the family and working with you, and how are they perceived by the family as well?
Yeah, you know, that's a really great question. I remember when I first received the text from the BT and I was calling my supervisors, I also felt the same way, as a little scared in how CPS was going to be perceived by the family, but also I guess me and the RBT both were perceiving CPS as an aversive stimuli as well. And, you know, when we made the phone call, it's just, I guess, like a phone call center, right? And it's like a hotline that you can call. But they immediately connected us with one specific person, and that one specific person was able to handle all of this report, all of the investigation, the after investigation goals. She was the one that was our main point of contact, but she also facilitated other meetings with other departments in the area that we found very helpful for other families, and it actually motivated us to continue referring families and even prompt families to do so some self-referral as well for different resources. So I would say this was a very interesting reporting incident issue because it completely changed our minds about CPS as a professional, and they seem very open to collaborate and very easy to collaborate with as well.
That's wonderful. I think also you highlight something there about those preventative measures and also, you know, ways to get Child Protective Services involved in an antecedent way, not in always a consequence way. So that's a great story. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hey, Arlette. First, amazing job. This is one of the most wonderful outcomes I've heard in a situation like this. So awesome, first of all. So my question, I just want to get your thoughts on, like, how do you feel, or do you feel like your course of action or how things played out would have been different if mom had responded differently that day? So if when the BT was kind of asking those questions, those probing questions, mom came with a really honest answer, or at least what she said gave you the information you needed. And do you feel like things would have turned out different, or you would have had to kind of take a different path if she had said, oh, he fell, or I don't know, he came home from school like that? Things would have been different.
Yeah, definitely. After that incident, it changed my whole mind in how to communicate with my behavior technicians and what things to look for. Because at first, when she asked the first question, this is a client who had high levels of energy. He was always jumping around. He was always, he had a trampoline outside. It was kind of common that sometimes, kids his age will come home from, oh, he just fell at school, or we don't know exactly what happened. Or even when we're blocking and redirecting, sometimes the kids will, because he was so tiny and he was so fast. So we were, thinking about all those different factors. And but one of the things that the behavior technician pointed out to me was he doesn't want to play. It's not just the bruises. He just doesn't want to play. So either he's sick, he doesn't have a fever, he seems okay. Is he feeling some pain? He also, it's Saturday morning, parents are not outside, they're in the room, the whole house just feels a little tense, and I know that's not behavioral at all, but it just she just felt that tension in the air basically. And she also expressed that when she asked him about the bruises the first time, he immediately looked away and looked down, which is very unusual for this client as well, because he was very defiant. So he will always just contradict us. He will always just challenge us to follow through. So this was very, he didn't seem like himself, right? And then the fact that she asked and then he looked at mom and he looked down, that also pointed her to a specific situation that it had happened at home, or that mom knew something about it. So I think if we, we didn't have that information from the mom at that point, I was definitely planning already on, I remember it was Saturday morning and I was just coming from a hike. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go and dress professionally and I'm going to probably head out to this home, because we're probably going to need to have a meeting with his family and just basically assess. Like at that point, I felt I probably need to see the kid and just be there also if something escalates. But I think just looking for those things that, make the kid seem different. We work with these kids so often. We're in their homes. We become part of their usual routine. So the RBTs know the kid very well. They get to know the kids very well because they're there every time. And I remember when I used to be an RBT as well, a BT back then, I will just immediately see that something had changed. And I think, sometimes I have BTs that come to me and they present a change, and then we will have to really analyze it. Is it just us, or is it actual change going on in the home? But I think at this point, the BT felt very comfortable just, pinpointing all these things. And then when we talked about all of them together, we realized, okay, there's definitely something else going on. But just, to answer your question straightforward, I think we will definitely schedule a meeting with the family after from the supervisors, and just for that question, basically, it will be a little bit more straightforward. And but also in the same approach, as we want to hear from you about these bruises, to support, to help, what is going on with his behavior. How can we manage that behavior, but how can we help you also manage that behavior? I hope I answered your question. Did I do it right?
No, yeah, you did, because
Okay.
a lot of times things like this can kind of go either way, and sometimes it can be maybe explained away, and we might just say, okay, no problem. Like, he's an active kid. He does play. He comes home with scraped knees from school all the time. So, you could have accepted it. I think you guys did a great job reading those other environmental things that were going on and kind of putting it all together instead of just really just leaving it and saying, okay, no problem. So I think it was a great catch on your guys' part. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question, and Kathleen might answer this a little bit better. I'm not sure if it really pertains to your specific client, but there are, I think, behaviors and things that happen more frequently with children with autism, like wandering or not understanding when, something's a safety concern. So where do we as providers realize that, this is just something that happens with these kids, and draw the line that, oh no, the parents are being neglectful. They're not doing what they're supposed to. And that's probably, really hard to answer, but, any guidance on that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm happy to answer that for you, Farah. This is Kathleen again. So I think that when we get those reports, it's very important to gather all the information through the lens of the family and try to identify why it's happening, and if there's anything that we can reasonably offer to help ensure safety. So this is something that we see a lot of, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the family is not taking it seriously, that they're not taking precautions. Perhaps they're not quite sure what precautions to take or what to do next, for example. And so that's where we as providers can come in and provide those modifications, recommendations, and resources and help the family and child. Or we can pull in additional resources, and it doesn't necessarily have to be via making a report to CPS. It can be through other health insurance resources or resources in the community. And so that's why I really think having a team-based approach and consulting and talking through it is very helpful in trying to make a determination as to what to do next.
Great. Excellent questions. Thank you so much. I was hoping that we could move through the panelists to see if you had any questions or comments or additions. And one that I thought was actually particularly interesting was the medical issues with the medication that came up with this case, and something that we I don't really think about a lot when we think about neglect. And so, Dr. Stoll, I was wondering if you had any comments related to that or anything else that you would like to add.
Yeah, so again, really, really well done. It's incredible to see how much advocacy and how much work you did with this family, and couldn't applaud you more in how professional it was handled, both toward the parents as well as with your staff and then also your supervisors. So really well done. As far as thinking about, medications and the concept of neglect, and this is where it gets tricky, because as a parent, you have the ability to make decisions for your child, and it is not against the law to change your child's medication. It's not ideal, and we have people do it all the time, where they'll call up and say, we stopped it, it wasn't working, or we, whatever. I think the thing from the medical standpoint, it's our job to be working with those families to help them understand why it's important to take a medicine every day, or when it would be important to call if they feel like things aren't working. Because some of the medicines, and it sounds like this child had a lot of medication changes in that month, which is a major problem anyway, which I'll talk about in a second. But regardless, there's that trust relationship. Just like you guys have trust in the home, we need to be working to build trust within our therapeutic contexts as well. So I guess for me, the parents changing the medicines also may have been a symptom of the provider not kind of making clear expectations and helping that family to understand what the medicines were supposed to do, and also potential dangers that could happen if they change the medicines on their own. So those are a couple of things. Then the other thing that's really tricky, and I guess it's more for kind of your information as you work with kids that are on medications, but it's incredibly important to be patient when you're working with these kids and you're prescribing medications. So not only do they tend to have more unique ways of responding to medications than children without autism. It's actually really interesting. But it's important to be patient as a prescriber. So in other words, hearing that this kiddo had numerous medication changes in the span of a month is really alarming to me. Because that's causing a lot of, you're not even giving that child's body time to kind of respond and react to a medication change, let alone however many that he actually had. So again, that goes to the trust thing, and I think that for families who have children who are on medication, that can sometimes be really emotional for them because they feel like they couldn't do it and now they have to have a medicine to, quote, fix their kiddo, which is obviously not how we look at it, but sometimes it can feel like a failure to parents. Other parents don't feel that same way, but that certainly is something that we have experienced with families that we take care of. So what that means is the prescriber needs to understand that and work with the family to say, hey, listen, I know this is kind of tough, but your child has X, Y, and Z behaviors, and we're at the point where you've done everything you can, and now we need to consider trying something like a medication. Here's my point to all of this. It's that it's helping a family to understand the thought process behind your decisions. So whether it be a BCBA in the home, just like you did, and working with them to understand the process of CPS being involved and the process of all of these different things, it's very important that prescribers do that as well. So again, I've joked on here before that I can't control all prescribers, and I do completely get that many people don't do this, but it is really important for their medical provider to say, here's what we're trying to do with this medication. Here's what you can expect. Here's how we'll know if it's working or it's not working. And that typically builds, again, that trust relationship where the family might call and say, look, we're at our wit's end. We don't like this stuff, or we do like this stuff, so we doubled it, which, by the way, I get way more uptight about people adding than I do about them taking away, although taking away inappropriately can also be bad too. But anyway, so that, I guess, would be my 2 cents. As far as the neglect goes, it's really a tricky place. When a child is in foster care, that is a definite no. Like, foster parents cannot change medications without, a physician's prescription, for example. However, there is nothing legal that says you can't stop your medications, your kids' medications. Now, granted, obviously there are caveats to that, and if they're not going to school or they're, whatever, there are different things like that. But it's an important thing to kind of navigate and think about with the family. So I don't know if that was helpful or not, but hopefully it helped.
Very much. Thank you. I appreciate the input on that. And I don't know if we'll have time, but there's another related question that might come up if we do.
No problem.
So, Sarah Baca, I was wondering, from your perspective and the work that you do, working with quite a few families and the treatment barriers that they encounter, have you worked with families and kind of walked them through this process in the past, or had experiences with families where they are in need of additional supports, and you see that from that perspective?
So no, I haven't walked a lot of families through it. What I have seen is families who have had their children taken away from them, that DYFD then gives them our contact information to find trainings and things like that. the frustrating thing about that is that they don't, in my opinion, I don't think they walk them through it good enough. I mean, giving a family a phone number to call, if they want to get their child back versus actually, here's what's available. Here's a training that you can attend, or even looking into putting on trainings through CYFD so often, I think would be probably a better use and more helpful to families. Because calling me and then I have to give phone numbers, and it's frustrating as a parent, not being able to just, you kind of feel helpless. I feel helpless a lot of times because I can't just say, here's this training that we're having, come to it. We don't have that capacity as an organization yet to do that. So then I have to, kind of guide them to UNM. And I know it's just like giving so many phone numbers, it's all overwhelming. You just want your child back. So I hope that answers your question about that. But I did have another question as a parent. Do you, well, first off, I could never imagine, everybody knows I'm so emotional, and hearing this and hearing like how the parents must have felt is just, pretty traumatic. Are the parents given kind of scenarios on what if, if you feel like you put your child's life in danger at the get-go when you very first start therapy, are they given, like, here's what to do, here's who to call if you ever feel like, you can't handle your child or things like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Sarah. That is definitely also a really good point. As an antecedent management for sure, having to explain that to a parent, if you ever feel in that point that you're about to explode, this is what you can do instead of, bursting out. But I think, at this point for this specific family, and I'm thinking about my other clients, at the beginning of the assessment, we typically share with them different resources that they can look through. And although we sometimes provide them, I think we probably could do even a better job as well as highlighting it even more because I think at the beginning of an assessment we give them a lot of information, and just like you mentioned, there's a lot of forms. It could be definitely overwhelming for the families. So I think this is a really good reminder from your point of view to keep reminding parents as well, this is what you have available in the community. This is what you can access at this point and for these situations, because it can be overwhelming, a lot of information at once for sure. So I think that's a really good point for sure.
And then the other question was, are they, and I guess we'd go with my first question was, do they know the reporting requirements that say, you can maybe bring that up to them. So maybe they'll think twice about, hurting their child if that's, and I know that's never the intention, but sometimes, things get really, really hard and sometimes that happens. But maybe if they're given that kind of information, the reporting requirements that you all have to do, have to report, maybe that would kind of make them think twice.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would like to pass that question to Kathleen.
Sure, absolutely. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Yes, we do. So most providers, I think, educate families at the onset of services that we are mandated reporters. So that includes our healthcare administrators, our behavior analysts, and RBTs. And really what that means, I think in the beginning of services, families are given a lot of information. And so it's not surprising that that's not the focus. In the very beginning. It's something that we can provide refreshers on. But I would like to say, actually making a report is something that's pretty rare. There are typically modifications and resources that we can provide to prevent these occurrences. And also because we understand our families through our lens and our relationship, we can find other ways to provide support, and it's not necessarily considered abuse or neglect of a child. And so I would like to say that they are very rare. They do come up, and we are very open with our families and supporting them through the process, and then also collaborating with the child welfare, like Arlette pointed out in this case example as well, where we're advocating for the families. And if the parents are involved in parent training, we're providing those positive reviews to the child welfare organization as well, and really rooting the families on to be successful. So it really is rare, but when it does occur, we absolutely take a supportive approach and feel like that's critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate all the effort that you take to be that support, because sometimes that's just what the family needs to get through it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that was a great reminder, and thank you, Sarah. Sarah Bowman put something in the chat box about a barriers assessment. So we actually have a barriers assessment that we use internally. We'd be happy to share that with ECHO as well. And it's basically just a checklist that goes through different barriers that a family might encounter, and it's a nice way to just ensure that you're thinking about all of those points and then connecting them to different resources at the onset of treatment. And that's the goal, is to identify those barriers at the onset of treatment and then be able to connect them to those resources. So for those of you that are new to ECHO, at the end of the clinic, what we do by Monday, we upload the resources that we've discussed, and you can access those online through the website. So those are accessed through the email that you'll receive, and then the video will be accessible within 1 week. Dr. Goldsmith, do you have any additional comments or questions?
Yeah, I have one comment, and then I have one question. I agree. I think it was a really great presentation. I think it brought up a lot of issues, so it was a great learning case for everyone. I think, Sarah's question made me think of something that we do at Trumpet that I thought I would share and may be helpful for some providers. So anytime that we're working with a family that has a kiddo with significant problem behavior, and we've written what we call an SBA BIP report, right, a singular report that documents all of our assessment processes, data, and the resulting intervention plan. The intervention plan is part of that, and then at the bottom, we always include a crisis plan documented at the outset, because even if it's not terribly severe, even if we don't expect the worst, right, we want to prepare parents and make them feel like they've got something to do in the event that things kind of take a left turn or really get out of control for them. And so, I can't speak to how many times we've had to use that. I don't have sort of the data on it, but I think it certainly makes me feel better to know that it's there and it's in writing, and I think it makes our parents feel better to know it's there and it's in writing. So just a thought of how you might be able to tweak your practices a bit. And then I think the other question that I had is, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the documentation that goes along with this, right? That I think that's one of the things that comes up for us at Trumpet, is that we want to make sure that we're documenting our efforts. And there's always this tricky point about including information within clinical documentation in a way that captures the details, that keeps us ethical and appropriate with regards to all requirements. And then there's the component about including details in such a way that if records were requested by a parent, the documentation would be appropriate for them to read. And I'm just wondering if any issues related to how you document these types of events, particularly a prolonged, complicated event like this, came up for you.
Yeah, that is definitely a really good question. I was talking to Kathleen when we were putting together these presentations about, this incident happened back in 2014. And we have, when putting it together, I had to go and review all of that documentation to make sure I was accurate with my information. And it was definitely really good to see that we had everything documented, all the session notes from the behavior technicians, all of our reports, any updates of the treatment, the report that was sent to CPS, how we communicated with parents, how the specific concerns that parents brought up. Everything was documented in the client's records, which was really good. And I would like to get also Kathleen's input on further just elaborate more on documentation, because that's a very important responsibility for us as well.
Yep. Tina, I agree. I think that's a big consideration and something that we talk a lot about, and really try also to train our providers on how to document and making sure that it's fact-based and objective and there's no emotions within the documentation. And then as long as it's factual. There are also things that we keep, for example, in our practice management solution that the families can access to, and other things that we would write in a public report. And I think being able to discriminate where it's best placed also has been helpful for us, but it can be tricky.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I agree. And then just a final comment is just that I think kudos to your RBT who was on this case, because I think the trickiest thing about this, or one of the tricky things about this stuff, is just noticing, right? And if you had a less aware behavior therapist who didn't notice that there was a change in his behavior and demeanor, just didn't pick up on those details, that things could have gone on longer than was necessary. And I think that's a skill that, when we think about initial early staff training, we talk about a lot at Trumpet, like just how to be aware, how to notice, how to take in all the details when there's always so much to attend to. So I just think that stood out to me as you were talking about your behavior therapist, that person was really an asset to your client, and that they were a great noticer of the details. So terrific job.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more with you, Dr. Goldsmith. I particularly enjoyed so much working with RBT, not only because she was right on her strategy implementation, but also because I learned a lot from her. I learned a lot of different things that we even collaborated and put in a presentation for our BTs in how to communicate these different things, and how to even identify unusual occurrences that may not qualify for an actual incident, but that we still need to record for in case we do come across an incident. And she was just very unique, but it taught me, and I think it allowed us to share that, those tips like you mentioned with other technicians as well. So I highly appreciated that from her for sure.
Yeah. And for those of you Arlette was referencing, we have two different report types, unusual occurrences and incident reports. And so we encourage our technicians to report anything that's unusual, which allows us to be able to then ask further questions and investigate if we need to. Okay, Zoe, I would like to turn it over to you.
Great. As everybody has said, Arlette, really, really wonderful presentation, I think. Extraordinarily informative for all of us in terms of when things are done well, like what is best outcome, right? This is really like best outcome. And I think I want to just note too is that sometimes the outcomes aren't so great, are still good, but aren't so great, that it can get more sticky and feelings get hurt and it can be a little bit more challenging. But I think that your ability to use the ethical code, right, to really go through, these are our guidelines, and to use those to really guide practice, and with a well-trained staff, both from the BT all the way up, through your supervision to those who support you, that when we do that, in my experience, and I think this case, is that we have the best chance of it going well. And if it doesn't go well, we at least know that we did what we needed to do, right? It's like a path that we can follow. So if things don't go well, we can say, okay, well, I did the best that I could do. I did it within a context of a team of people that I trust. We did everything that we could, because these are really tough. I mean, I know that I have spent nights, I've lost sleep over situations like this, of wondering if I did it right or didn't I, if I had said, if I had noticed, all those things. And I think really using that ethical code in this way it is very powerful, and really what the ethical code is supposed to do, right? It's supposed to protect you and the family and give us, again, a bit of a roadmap. So really incredible kudos for you, and I think just to know for all of us that there are going to be times that it does go well and there are times that it's not going to go so well. This is really, I think, for me, one of the hardest parts of my job. And again, it's only come up a couple of times, but it's been very tricky. So, and then just the last thing is really, I think this is a wonderful example in terms of what we're trying to establish and support within this ECHO project, is that, incredible job utilizing community resources. And utilizing CPS, which can, for many of us as practitioners and also as families, can be very scary. And I think every time we do that in a proactive way and really see that it can be a very positive force, both in terms of supporting a family, but also in terms of a resource for us as providers, and also getting involved with the school. And I just think you did a tremendous job on many, many levels, and a great example. So thank you for that today. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you, Zoe. And I think you bring up a really great point, too. This is such a wonderful presentation, but very often it isn't this best case outcome. This is unique, which is why we wanted to present this case. But I think it is a really good point to bring up that oftentimes it doesn't wind up with the same type of outcome. And we've had situations where it's been very significant and the family has decided to discontinue services, and debriefing with the registered behavior technicians, that's part of our job, is to support the technicians and let them know that what they did was the right thing, and though the child does need behavior analytics services, their safety is the primary concern. And so that was the decision that we would need to make regardless. And so I do think that that's important for us to know too, that it may not wind up with this type of outcome, but this is really very much due to the case manager, which was Arlette, on the case, and why it was so positive. Today was a wonderful presentation from both of you. I love the questions that came through. I think that we are just about out of time, so thank you so much.